All right. As Dr. Weedy said, the first item on the agenda does relate to the administrative rules. These are the current proposed changes for the rules for the medical marijuana program that were sent to each board member last week. These proposed modifications are being made to certain changes that were made this last legislative session, as well as other areas that have been identified by the Department of Health. For background purposes, I'll provide a brief overview of kind of the administrative rule procedures that all state agencies have to comply with. There is a specified process required by state law for establishing rules as well as modifying the administrative rules. Very briefly, the process includes first filing proposed rules with legislative council along with a written notice. Next, we do a publication of the notice in all newspapers that must take place at least 20 days prior to the administrative hearing date. That public hearing date is available for parties to come in and provide either oral or written comments in relation to the changes in the rules. And then we have to have an additional 10 days after that hearing to accept written comments up to that point. After that time period, then the state agencies will respond to all comments received, whether they're verbal or oral. We have a review performed by the Office of the Attorney General, ultimately filing the rules with with Legislative Council for rule changes to go to the Legislative Administrative Rules Committee. That legislative committee does only meet quarterly, so there are certain time periods and dates that have to be met to be able to get to the administrative rules when you would like to get to them. So where we're at with the rules for the medical marijuana program at this point, they did go to the State Health Council last week. This is one current additional step that the Department of Health has that other state agencies don't, and that is to first get them approved by the State Health Council. So once they were approved last week, we did get them sent out then to this advisory board, and you are hearing them really for a presentation and kind of input from the capacity of this board. The changes are available on the division's website. The public hearing is scheduled for April 8th, which in turn means that we'll accept comments through April 18th. Our attempt would be to try to have all information filed with Legislative Council by May 2nd in hopes to attempt to get on the Administrative Rule Committee meeting in June. If we were to miss any of the deadlines, we'd be pushed out 3 more months. So with that being said, we'll kind of go over these administrative rule changes. We do have them up on the screen, and Donna's going to kind of scroll along as you hear me kind of briefly cover all the changes included in the rules. Happy to answer questions or provide more information as in the interest of time here. I'll try to get through each of them and just give a little brief information in relation to the changes. So the first change we're going to cover is actually on page 3. And it relates to a definition included in the rules. Under state law, with this change here, what we're doing is allowing additional time for manufacturing facilities to process concentrates or medical cannabinoid products. While we know the 48-hour requirement can be met, we certainly understand there may be instances or potential new processes that may be identified that may require some additional time. This would allow the department to provide that time. And I should have asked Senator Roars a thumbs up if you can hear us okay.
I can. You're not. I had to turn the volume up quite a bit, but I can hear you.
All right. Thank you. The next change is on page 4. So you'll see that this change is an actual full new section that is being proposed to the administrative rules. This is the first of 2 new sections that is proposed. The state law identifies a minor, or defines a minor, as an individual under the age of 19. A minor application is required to have a parent or legal guardian sign for that minor. However, there may be instances in which an 18-year-old individual has neither of those, and the proposed change here covers an area like that. So we'll get to jump all the way ahead to page 10. And you'll see here at the bottom of the page where we are looking at an addition related to the Department of Health providing information to dispensaries to be posted. This change would require education materials or recall information that is provided by the department to be posted, excuse me, in these entities. If we just scroll down a little bit on the next page, you're going to see a change at the top of the page where the word shall is being changed to a may. Little tricky one to see because it's a one word change. Currently, dispensaries are required to accept marijuana that's brought into a dispensary. However, there may be instances in which a dispensary may not want that marijuana in their facility, and it may be best to have the marijuana remain outside of the dispensary. That's what this change then would allow dispensaries to have that discretion on what to do in certain instances. At the bottom of this page, you'll see proposed changes are made to the materials used to incorporate into what's called medical marijuana waste. Medical marijuana waste is a term defined in state law where really there is no, I would say, chance that the medical marijuana waste could be, dug out by somebody or used by somebody to get that high or to use to make some type of product or, do some type of extraction with. In regards to this area, with more knowledge gained as this program has been operational on our end regarding waste and also reviewing the landfill operations where the waste is received, these changes are being proposed. We'll get to go to the top of page 17 next, where the change here makes it clear that instances of noncompliance with laws and rules are to be reported to the department by manufacturing facilities, dispensaries, and the contracted lab. On the next page, this is the second of two new sections that are being proposed. This one specifically relates to the making of a medical cannabinoid product, which are your solutions, capsules, topicals, and patches. So those are the four categories of products when we talk medical cannabinoid product. What this section does is requires information to be provided on the other ingredients that are being used by a manufacturing facility to help ensure that the expiration date that we put on the product is reasonable. We don't want to be in the position where it turns out an ingredient that was used to make the product turns out has an expiration date that's well before the expiration date that's going on the container of that medical cannabinoid product. The next couple of pages, 19 through 21, you're going to see changes in relation to labels on the container. So we'll start with that first one that's on the screen there by Donna. And this is a label that goes on to dried leaves and flowers. The change from harvest lot number to batch number is being proposed due to the way that our IT system really handles that information. And the flower lot number is really a number that has more relevant information to it than the harvest lot number, where you could have multiple flower lots coming out of. Also, you'll notice a change is made to allow one or the other. They can still put both on if they want in regards to the net weight. And finally, on the dried leaves and flowers, there's a change being made that coincides with the current practice, which is the potency information identified by the contracted lab with the Department of Health is the information that goes on to the label. The next changes relate to the concentrate containers, and you're going to see similar changes here as well regarding the measurement unit and potency information. You will also notice that there's a disclosure requirement being added to the label for the extraction process that's used and the type of solvent used in the extraction process, as this information may be beneficial for certain patients depending on their condition to know what's been done in formulating that product. Also then, the final label information relates to that medical cannabinoid product. Again, you'll see same changes related to measurement unit, potency, adding the extraction process. And then also there's a change on here regarding serving size instead of it being mandatory to be applicable. This change mainly deals with the serving size of a topical, where typically your lotion or roll-on is going to be applied to the affected area. So the number of servings in that container is really going to be dependent on how much is being used to apply to that affected area. So that's what that change really does there in that subsection number 7. And then on the next page, the final change in relation to labels relates to preventing the use of the term organic from being used on the label. Moving right down into section 27 of the rules, you'll see languages being struck through, which I should have talked about at the beginning and apologize for that. The struck through language is what is proposed to be coming out. Underlined is the information proposed to be going in. So you can see on this page that we are looking at removing language, and this is due to state law being modified from this past session. As you may recall from our last meeting, we talked about that state law was changed to allow up to 5 designated caregivers for a registered qualifying patient, moving from 1 to 5. With the number of caregivers and the potential changes that can end up happening with those caregivers over time, we just no longer require a caregiver's name be printed on the label. Next, we would go to the bottom of page 22. And we're adding language here that provides access for products already delivered to a dispensary to be picked up by the lab to be tested. We get to go all the way to page 30. The language is proposed to be removed here relating to what the manufacturing facility is to do with a batch when it's being tested. Our information technology system already identifies this information when the sample is selected. So we're proposing to remove this redundant requirement manufacturing facilities have. On page 34, this part of the change here relates to, again, legislation from this past session. Definitions for THC and total THC were added to the medical marijuana chapter of state law. So the change you see here in relation to the crossing out of Delta 9, in effect, makes the rule consistent with the law. The other change in section 51 here is to remove language that ties back to what we talked about in regards to the lab concentration amount or what the lab tests for potency to go onto the label of the container. And finally, you can hold your applause here on page 35 as our last one. And this relates to remediation of a failed flower lot for certain items. This change does allow a failed lot to be combined with other flower lots to go through an extraction process. We don't have, or the department doesn't have any concerns with this change and what could potentially occur here. And it does provide some flexibility to a manufacturing facility as well. So Dr. Wiebe and board members, like I said, I was going to be brief in the interest of time. I hit every change, but happy to answer any questions or provide clarification if board members have any.
Any questions for Jason?
So we will be then going forward with that timeline that we talked about and hopes to have everything to Legislative Council by May 2nd. If everything gets to the Administrative Committee in June, these rules would have an effective date of July 1 of this year.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. And so we'll move to the next item, written certification information.
At the last board meeting, there was discussion about the medical conditions. So we are going to use a PowerPoint here. This PowerPoint is available on the division's website. If you jump out to our website and click the presentation link on the left-hand side of our homepage, you will be able to get to this presentation as well. So there's the typical legal disclaimer. Allie is so happy that I have that on every slide. It's just a given. So the first slide here is a slide that you saw at your last meeting. This came from our last annual report. And here's where some of the discussion from board members came about in regards to why this agenda item was included on today's meeting. A number of questions were raised in regards to more information about anxiety disorder specifically. Looking for information about other conditions that were marked on these written certifications when anxiety order was selected. So keep in mind here that the total number of conditions is going to exceed the number of patients in the program, as a healthcare provider can mark more than one condition when they complete the written certification. So the healthcare provider, whether that's the physician, a physician assistant, or advanced practice registered nurse, isn't limited on the conditions that they want to check on a written certification. So last week, we conducted a review of information specifically related to anxiety disorder. So what we did is we used the number of patients as of last week. You'll notice on our website that we did update the patient information. And while that patient information showed last week that we had 7,368 patients registered in the program, what we did in our analysis of the anxiety disorder really focused on about 7,100 patients, as we excluded those that were in the renewal process. Not knowing if the medical condition potentially could change or more were to be added, we just didn't include those in this analysis. So what you're going to see here on the next slide is based on our review. When anxiety disorder was selected, what we identified that is approximately 51% of the time, a healthcare provider only marked anxiety disorder. The remaining 49% of the time, they selected anxiety disorder and at least one other condition. So that's the first breakout of the information that the board was looking at. So we took it one step further then. We then analyzed that 49%. And here's certain information that you'll be able to see based on our review. The biggest category that we identified related to PTSD. You can see it, the slide talks or identifies for you that 32% of the written certifications that had anxiety disorder selected, and remember, it's just those that have anxiety disorder is what these numbers come from. 32% of the time, anxiety disorder and PTSD were selected. When we dug down a little bit deeper and said, well, was there another condition selected with anxiety disorder and PTSD, whether it was one condition or three more conditions, that number actually increases to 45%. So that's your biggest category when you start looking at anxiety disorder in the program, that of the 49% of those written certifications where anxiety disorder is selected with another condition, 45% of the time it's anxiety disorder, PTSD, and another condition. We tried to look for your next biggest category to kind of identify where that was, and you're going to see it's that 10%. Now that 10% kind of goes hand in hand with the second 7% on this slide, and that's really related to pain. Where there is a specific spinal stenosis and chronic back pain, but there is also another condition in the law that talks about severe debilitating pain that hasn't been able to be treated over time, and they've tried other things for it, and it just haven't worked. So really, if you look at that, you're 17% you could say are related to specifically anxiety disorder and some type of pain as well. I know board members, kind of a lot of data numbers here in regards to that, but we believe that's kind of what the board was interested in. And I know One of the members on the board who is really looking for this isn't here, so we'll make sure that he's able to see that information as well, because I know Tracy was interested in knowing kind of where that was at too. But happy to answer any questions you may have in regards to this data.
I think it's great information, helps us really understand, what are people utilizing this for. I guess the only thing that surprises me is that it wasn't a greater percentage that had the kind of dual diagnosis there.
Thank you, Senator Roars. I have to admit, I haven't done an SQL or wrote an SQL in a long time, so it brought me back to my high school days, which was a very, very, very long time ago. But it was a good task for us to have to get better information and better knowledge as well.
And I think it's a great baseline for us as we move forward as well.
Once you have those numbers, does that mean that you just have those numbers, or are you going to use those numbers to create programs specific to those disorders too?
I think in regards to that question, what we'll use is more along with what Senator Roars looked at is part of, and we'll get into this in another agenda item here too, report information is now that the program is kind of growing out of that infancy stage, is really what information is going to be useful for people to track progress in the program in regards to this. This is a time-consuming process for us to go through the first time. I hope the amount of time, if we were to ask for this again, goes a little bit quicker. I know that Jordan Schatz on the team put in some time too with a lot of this, and it's just more complex data pull and then making sure our data is right as we want to provide you accurate information. So as far as additional programs, we're making it available. So, this is information I'd like to use if we start presenting to healthcare providers again. Since COVID, you could imagine the amount of time available for providing information to healthcare providers or meeting with them is something that's, just not regularly available. But it's also some information I think that the industry can use as well in meeting with, healthcare providers or legislators or whatever the case may be.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you, Jason, for that information and pulling the data and analyzing it. So with this, we'll move to transdermal patches then.
Thank you, Dr. Wiebe. So transdermal patches, and you can see on this slide, are sitting under those medical cannabinoid products. At the last board meeting, a topic of discussion was the fact that transdermal patches have yet to become available for qualifying patients under the program. Following that meeting, I did speak with both manufacturing facilities, and one of them is moving forward to have patches get to market for the program. Similar to having one manufacturing facility process capsules, having one manufacturing facility start in the transdermal patch market seems reasonable to the department from an economic standpoint. We do know that the manufacturing facility that's moving forward with the transdermal patches has reached out to various vendors looking for kind of the best options available when it comes to a patch. That manufacturing facility recently provided the department with a drafted standard operating procedure for us to review and approve and ask questions on in regards to the transdermal patch. And they're also still looking through and identifying what the best options are for those patches for the patients in the program. What I would say right now, board members, is that we expect the manufacturing facility to continue that work, continue providing information and working with us. And if things can go well, and fingers crossed here, if you haven't ordered anything recently, consider yourself lucky for one thing. But if things can go well here, what we'd be hopeful of is having those transdermal patches to market possibly within the next 3 to 5 months. And that would be the update that I have for the board members, and certainly happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions on transdermal patches? Okay. So we'll move to the next agenda item, 30-day purchase limit.
Let me go back one down real quick. Thank you. So still the same slide here. And I know it's after lunch and you've heard me babble now for 30 minutes. But one of the things, and I think Senator Roars, I believe it was you, that asked if the department could bring certain information to the board, common questions or maybe common issues to discuss and possibly have some input from the advisory board. I would say that this agenda item falls into that request. So this part of this slide was shown at the last meeting. And as a reference, using it here again, and the main reason I'm showing it for board members here is when we talk about a 30-day purchase limit, we want to make sure that everyone's on the same page here, that there's two 30-day purchase limits, and the two purchase limits are available to all adult patients. So they get a purchase limit on the far left side of this, your dried leaves and flowers. That's one purchase limit, and they get a purchase limit of the medical marijuana products. So keep in mind, though, that these purchase limits we're going to talk about are in state law, so ultimately it's a legislative decision as to what those amounts are to be. So we'll start with dried leaves and flowers on the next slide. In a 30-day period, a registered qualifying patient is eligible to purchase up to 2.5 ounces or 70.87 grams. Really, we use the 70.87 grams in our IT system to track all purchases because, as you can see by the slide, dried leaves and flowers are sold in gram amounts. So when it comes to this is the easier of the two purchase amounts to understand. Whatever they buy in the weight is what comes off that 70.87 grams. So I buy 7 grams of flour today, your limit goes down to 63.87. The system tracks to the minute of your purchase. So exactly 30 days later, or 720 hours, that 7 grams comes back onto the patient's allotment. We typically tell people, make sure you don't go in at that exact minute as the system's got to update and they may need to sync, which takes some time to sync. So we typically tell them, give it a few hours in regards to if you're tracking it, that you're up against your limit to go and to be able to purchase more dried leaves and flowers. There is an enhanced amount, but that enhanced amount under the law is only available for an individual with a medical condition of cancer. And the healthcare provider has to specifically authorize that. So when a healthcare provider completes a written certification, if they click on a debilitating medical condition of cancer, they get an additional box to pop up on the written certification where they have to click on that they authorize or do not authorize that enhanced amount. Overall, I would say, even since the program began, we do hear someone talk about the fact that the 2.5 ounces of dried leaves and flowers may not be sufficient. However, this is pretty infrequent at this point in time. And compared to the other limit, it's the other limit that we're really beginning to hear more and more from patients, as well as hearing from dispensary representatives when we have the team members on site. So that's the limit I think that kind of want to start talking about and have a discussion with board members in regards to that. So on the next slide, you'll see the information for what the other limit is. For medical marijuana products, it's 4,000 milligrams of THC, and that applies to the concentrate, solution, capsules, topicals, and the patches that'll be coming to market. Now, this is based on the amount of THC in the actual product that's purchased. So for example, if someone were to purchase a tincture that a 30 milliliter tincture or cannabinoid solution that has a total of 500 milligrams of THC in it, 500 milligrams of THC comes off their limit. So, in that case, if they're buying 500 milligram tinctures, they're going to get up to 8 tinctures before they hit that 4,000 milligrams of THC. What I'd say is we're starting to hear more and more from patients about the fact that the 4,000 milligrams is not sufficient for a 30-day period. This especially, seems to be the case for those that are using the solutions and the PDO RSO in regards to the type of products that people are using for that. We've also heard concerns from individuals who have cancer and they don't smoke. So the enhanced amount, even if they have it for dried leaves and flowers, is kind of meaningless. Yep, doesn't help them, Jake, in regards to that. And they really need more of that 4,000 milligrams of THC. So this topic is brought to the board for a discussion about possible options to increase, the milligrams of THC in a 30-day period, keeping in mind that it is a legislative decision. But I think this is a good starting point for the department to get some input from board members in regards to this topic.
I have a couple things I guess I'd like to put on top of that if I could. Definitely what you've been saying, I've heard that, I work in the dispensary every single day, so I hear from the patients, all the time. I am a patient myself as well. So I use the concentrates as well for my pain and for sleep, those kind of things. I definitely do see people that are using the cannabinoid solutions and or the FSO like you're talking about, definitely are walking a thin line towards the end of that 30 days and, either having to supplement flour, which they don't really want to do, or, just go without until their allotment comes up. And I don't know if anyone else has ever looked into what, I was just kind of showing Casey this, but what it actually, if you were to actually go on like an RSO, FSO regimen to actually help with cancer, it is to the point where, once you build the tolerance up to the THC that you're using, they are saying to use up to 1 gram of FSO a day, which is a crazy amount. Don't get me wrong, it's a lot. But if someone is using this as, a cancer fighter or trying to help with their cancer, with the allotments that we have right at the moment, there's no way they could even come close to getting that amount. That literally would have them, if they were using that, you'd have about 4 days worth of product at that point in time. And it, like you were just saying, the enhanced allotment is nice for the cancer patients, but I hear, a lot of those people, like you were saying, don't end up smoking. They're only using those other products, and a lot of them, lung cancer or whatever it is, can't use that actual marijuana unless they were to actually, use butter, make butter or something like that. To my understanding, that isn't really legal as of right now, correct?
There was some information provided during this last session from our former legal counsel that talked about, the fact that if you were to take dried leaves and flowers and make a product, there's no legal protections under the law for that product. So if you're transporting that and you were pulled over and they tested it,
you're in trouble at that point in time. There's no way to know it from the dispensary.
So yes, I can see where, that is taken. Really just, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm listening to you at that point.
Nope, this is the good information. I think this is what the board members to hear from the dispensary perspective, as your interactions and communications with patients far exceeds anything that the department has.
Sure.
We obviously, and Donna will tell you how much time she can spend on the phone in one day.
Well, I'm sure she's on the phone a lot. I know I have patients that come in with all kinds of questions every single day, so I'm sure you get bombarded. I can't even imagine.
But I think it's important to realize that, there are certain patients that, really do use or are looking for a large amount or a larger amount of that. So when you talk about, FSO or PDO, it comes in a syringe. And typically you're going to be looking at, if you get a 1 gram syringe, in that 650 to 850 milligrams of THC in a 1 gram syringe. I'm hoping industry corrects me in
No,
regards
you're
to that,
right.
but it's probably in that neighborhood.
Consistent, yep.
So that gives you an idea if they get 1 gram and, they may potentially need to go to a gram. And when you talk about that too, we're getting into an edibles area, but I don't mean to, but this is one of those that is ingested.
Yes.
I mean, this is what they actually ingest. So they can, and I'm not saying to go and make it edible, but to put that on a Tic Tac, or you put that on a cracker with peanut butter, we hear a lot of still in regards to, that's their administration for taking it as well. Depending on how people digest things, we are hearing that, somebody could basically take this 1 syringe in a day and may hardly feel any effects. Where somebody can literally take a grain of rice, ingest that, and
be floored. Yeah.
So ingestion of that really depends on the type of person.
Yeah, I definitely have patients that come in and say the edibles don't work for them at all. I think that's just the way they metabolize, like we keep saying. Most of the time when I'm talking with those patients, those are also people that need higher doses of oxy or whatever they're using to help with the pain on the other side of this. So they must have higher metabolisms that work through that stuff a little faster. But yeah, I guess as far as like the RSO and stuff like that, I do have a sheet here if anyone would like to look at it, just on like the doses and stuff like that. And this is just one printout that I saw, obviously, but just how much you are supposed to go up incrementally each day. And yeah, I guess that's the one other thing that I did have a question about for the PDO, and I had a patient actually bring this up to me just the other day, was their doctor has been tracking their usage or what they've been using just to see, wants to know what's going on. And his doctor doesn't want him to smoke, but he gets the PDO/FSO, and when it pops up on the thing, it says product for inhalation. And I know that's probably what you were just kind of talking about right there. As far as, the wording and whatnot and edible type thing. But I don't, just wanted to throw it out there that was one of the things that a patient said to me, that their doctor had asked them a question about because it did say product for inhalation.
Yeah, and what Jake talks about is the labeling and how things are converted in our IT system in BioTrack. And it's been that way from the beginning, that when we first started, when they do an extraction, it falls into a category, extract for inhalation. This type of product really doesn't do that. It's a costly change for us in regards to it, and we're still able to track information in the system, and it still comes off the allotment. So we have heard people inquire and say, why is that? And it's just a labeling in the system. It's more tracking purpose thing. So I could see if they run a report or they were to say it's going to say that instead of PDO or FSO. It gets into a economic type thing for us at certain points in the system too, that if we start breaking that out, where do we want to draw the line?
Sure.
With your waxes and shatters and butters and vape cartridges and, with even tinctures, we've talked about different formulations in regards to tinctures to kind of track a little bit too. It gets a little more complicated.
Sure.
The commercial side that's used by the industry has more bells and whistles than the state side does as well. But right now we've kind of left it as is because a couple of things. One, the cost involved with the change. And two, our contract with the information technology system. We just paid our annual fee, which I think was number 3 of 5. So we only have 2 years left on the contract. And then we're going to have to do whatever procurement tells us to do too, which would be ample time to look at a potential change like that as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Jason or Dr. Wiebe, this is Senator Roars. Just a couple questions that have just been popping through my head as you guys have been talking. It's been very interesting to learn a little bit more from the dispensary side and what you're seeing out there. Wondering, do we have a decent list of what other states, other states that have medical marijuana, what are their limits and where do we stand in comparison? I feel like maybe, Jason, you've showed that to us before in committee, but just to understand, as you talked about, especially with some of these particular, ways that people are taking it, they're finding it not to be enough. And then is this as a product, just being a nurse, a lot of the drugs that I give are weight-based dosing rather than a standard dosing. There's some stuff that's very standard, Tylenol and things like that. But when you get into other things, then we get into weight-based dosing. And has that been considered in this space?
Senator Royce, you are correct. In certain legislative committees, there has been information in regards to other states' information. This category is a little bit tougher for North Dakota to compare to other states because a lot of states just go based on grams. So your concentrate, you may get up to 8 grams in a 30-day period, which here you're probably talking 8 grams could get you into 7,000 milligrams of THC very quickly in a 30-day period. But we can certainly go through some information and put together something for the advisory board for a future meeting if you would like.
And I think even just over time, if we can kind of continue to track ourselves, and I'm sure you guys are already doing that internally, but for this advisory board to really track ourselves against other states and say, are we in line with other states? Are we an anomaly, on the high or low side, just to understand where we stand?
I think, Senator Royce, my last statement to a legislative committee was we're typically on the lower to medium range in regards to flower, and on the milligrams of THC, we're on kind of the lower end of that amount.
Thank you. And then just the curiosity about weight-based dosing.
Yeah, that is something that has not really been a discussion topic in regards to that. Certainly, we could work with manufacturing facilities to provide some education to dispensaries. And I say, instead of working with dispensaries first, what we do from an education standpoint for patients is the education materials and information that dispensaries use come from the manufacturing facility. They're the ones that make the products. They know what should be occurring. Dispensaries use that information then to provide to the patients or caregivers that do come in. So we could certainly have a discussion if we think that there's something out there and kind of get a feel from the industry if there is any information or something that they want to potentially, provide or make sure that dispensaries are aware of, so that can be communicated to dispensaries as well. Or excuse me, to patients as well.
And I know we were just talking, I don't mean to be long-winded and take up time, but, you're just asking about limits and whatnot and how we can maybe change that. Just in my experiences with people, for the most part, there are definitely people that use both allotments, right? But for the most part, people are either one side or the other. And like I said, they might interchange some things every once in a while, but for the most part, they're usually either using, concentrates, either it's the solutions or the vape cartridges or flower, and as far as, like the limits that we were just kind of talking about there, you said you have to go through legislation, which I get. I just had an idea, and I, throw this out there for other people before just talking. But, I don't know if there's a way that a person could set up like at the beginning of the year or every 6 months. And I know, like you said, it'd have to be a change through legislation, but to where they could there'd be like a bar, right? And they could maybe take down the bar of their flower where the extract goes up so they could have more extracts for that period of time, or vice versa, however they wanted to do that. It's just an idea that keeps floating through my head as they do that. So your allotment per se is still the same, just in a different area.
So what Jake is talking about is potentially a conversion. Well, I want more, and you calculate how much flour, the equivalent of flour over 2 milligrams of THC in the other product types. There is, I'm trying to think of a state that has something similar. What that creates is the option then for the patient to decide what more of a product do they want. I would say in North Dakota's program, a couple of things, and because we've had discussions about this, is overall our patient education level is probably not where it is. It's where some of the other states are at this point in time. And we have still a lot of confusion of how even the 4,000 milligrams of THC works in the system. We have a number of calls about the 30-day allotment, and the more confusing that this maybe potentially gets is going to be harder on the patients to figure out, and potentially the dispensaries then as well. But certainly something that, you know, as part of the discussion is an option that the board should be aware of, that if it's not, you know, an increase of the 4,000 milligrams for everyone, or an increase for certain medical conditions, or a combination of those two. Another option is, do you want to go down or potentially consider some type of conversion to allow flower over to the other side if I don't really want to use flower?
So currently, with the two subcategories, are the two categories of dried leaves and flower, and then the medical marijuana products. Does a patient get the max allotment for 30 days of leaves and flower and medical? So they're not, it's not restricted by what's being, okay.
Right.
Yep, they can come in and get their full allotment in a day if they want to. And I actually do have some patients that do that, and you don't see them for a month or two, you know. They'll come in and basically just, because they live however far away or whatever it is.
So the issue is that they get both, but those that don't smoke then are
So-
not really getting to benefit.
Exactly. So, and as we were just talking about, you know, they do make machines and stuff like that a person could make, you know, dried leaves and flour into butter or edibles, like you were saying. But I mean, obviously, if we're as a patient, you know, needing to take something to work possibly or whatever it is, I don't know what it is. If you have to leave with your house with that, then we're not covered at that. And yeah, there's a lot of people that use up that 4,000 milligrams for sure, and are, you know, wanting other or needing other, coming in and saying, well, I can't believe that I'm out already and whatnot, you know. That I definitely see that more than the flower, like you were talking about, like he said at the beginning. You know, the flower allotment is a pretty healthy allotment for the most part. There's maybe 5 or 10 patients I can think of that are down on my flower allotment, and for the most part, those are people that don't use a whole lot of the concentrate. So yeah, it's, you know, like I said, there's definitely patients that use both, and a lot of times if they are using both, they're not really running out at all. But there's definitely those people that, you know, people with COPD or different things that can't inhale. And when they're using that for heavy pain relief and maybe trying to get off their opioids and stuff like that, it's just not enough allotment for them to get through the month and still feel comfortable to be able to do daily activities.
And that would,
I'd be the 4,000 milligrams. Yeah.
smoking the flower, those challenges would potentially be the same with vaping.
Definitely. Yep. Inhalation at all for some of these people is just basically can't happen.
And then the other forms of medical marijuana, other than vaping, is it mostly reported in your experience that the effects are not as, it's not as effective?
For smoking, the actual flower you're
Well,
talking
and
about?
I'm thinking even like vaping, that the medical marijuana products like that versus taking a capsule or a topical, is vaping get a better effect?
It definitely depends on patient to patient,
Okay.
honestly. I mean, when you're using those vape cartridges, those have a pretty high THC level. So, you know, you definitely are going to feel effect using that. I don't hear many people saying that they don't get an effect from that. There is something to be said with you know, our cartridges in the way, there's other states that have full spectrum cartridges, which would mean that you actually have terpenes and cannabinoids in the actual oil still, whereas ours are a distillate, and it's basically just a THC distillate from what I understand. And, you know, there's definitely a more, they call it the entourage effect, where when you have all those cannabinoids and all those terpenes actually working together with the THC, the CBD, all those different things, it's actually a more full feeling or full effect than what you'd be getting with just an isolated cannabinoid.
Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know if that answered your question.
It does.
Yeah.
Good.
I guess not to jump in, but just for 1 second, if there's a lull here. As a manufacturer, I can just say that I think patient safety is an issue with people attempting to, if you want to call it cooking or converting flour over, not in the true conversion table part, but in making any form of a cannabinoid solution, whether you were going to even attempt to make a tincture, and or certainly if you're going to attempt to be making PDO or RSO solution, there's a reason we're tested very stringently, and I'm glad we are for the patient safety end of things. Just, I think it'd be almost impossible for somebody to make something at home. And that's the safety of the end product, not to mention them making that product in their home as well. The things that go into it, not the safest project in the world. So I just think increasing this limit for the people that would use it in comparison to risking that is a pretty fair trade-off.
100%.
Jason, is the plan or your thinking is that collect some ideas and input related to the amount and at some point get or formulate some proposal that could move forward?
Legislation.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think the great thing about the advisory committee is that we can see from the outside if it's actually something that's needed. Do we even want to go through the rigmarole of trying to create this legislation and pass it? And I think what we're hearing from the utilizing community and the regulatory community is it is a need in the community to make the program more effective for the patients. So.
And it also then, Dr. Weeby, two other points I think that are very helpful going through a legislative process is to refer back to the advisory board, that this is something that, you know, through the advisory board, you know, the department might have to, you know, present it, unless Senator Roars raises her hand and says she'll take care of everything in regards to that. But it also allows somebody like Senator Roars and eventually Representative West to be able to answer certain questions even when we're not in the room, which I think is very helpful as well. So if the board would like, we could certainly bring this back up, bring the information Senator Roy's requested from other states to kind of get an idea, and at a future meeting, you know, look at what is it that would like to do. We're getting very close. I hate to even admit it, we're getting very close to where we've got to have things ready for next session already. Julie's giving me that nasty look, because I said session already, it's right around the corner for us. And so.
I wouldn't go that far. Let's not. We got a good 9 months there, Jason.
So, we'll bring back some information for the advisory board to consider at next meeting, if that is okay with the board.
I think that would be great.
Okay. Any further questions or suggestions or comments to Jason on that topic? Okay, so let's move to report information.
All right, so at the last meeting, there was also a request for bringing information to the board related to certain reports or data. So the first thing we want to do is talk about what do we already have and kind of what does state law require. So you can see here on the slide, there's this is what the Century Code or state law actually says in section 39. Specifically, what our annual report that the department does provide at the end of a fiscal year, the information that's already included. So it's on numbers 1 through 8, and you can see 1 and 2 on this slide, and the next slide has 3 through 8, I believe, really 3 through 7, I think, but it provides, here's data that's already available. If you want to skip to the next one, Donna, thank you. So here's what we have. If you pull up the annual reports that are available on the division website, you'll see that information's already there and available to review. Now we get to the point of, where does the advisory board, what kind of information from legislators, from the industry? Because the industry may be interested in certain information, or, the public, or, what is the information that could be helpful? We're happy to provide information about the program, but we want to be very careful with the limited resources that the department has, that we're providing the right information and just not a bunch of data that nobody's going to use. So in a qualifying patient's application, there is a voluntary demographic section of that application. This is voluntary, so it is not a required field when they complete their written certification, but this is the information that individuals can provide. Certain applicants will fill it out completely, certain applicants will not provide anything, and certain applicants will actually provide certain information, but not all information. So what we'd be interested is in some input and discussion about information that could be useful. And what we will do with that is take that input. We'll meet with our legal counsel to ensure that we stay in compliance with the law before we provide something, and then potentially provide information to the board at future meeting and or meetings is kind of what our tentative plan is. And I think I saw Allie nod her head up and down out of the corner of my eye. So she seems good with that plan. So seems like a good plan A anyways, when it comes to the type of additional information outside of what's already required by the department to start to consider trying to provide on the program. I will say that slide that's up there now, there's check boxes for people to select. So your education level, it's following a format that the department uses on other forms to collect demographic information. The only typed in information is if they select other in certain categories, and they can type in information. Otherwise, we break that down into specified categories the department has identified in other reports. Of course.
So the voluntary demographic information, that additional reporting is the goal of that output to inform the board? Or would you also be informing legislators, and would it be, like, it might be open record anyway, but would it be posted online?
So
Available to the public?
what I would say is, if we're going to provide data, we're always careful because information is confidential under the program. So that here's what we'd like to provide, goes through Allie, she does her review, and Allison comes back to us and says, yay or nay, and here's why. So if we were to provide something that would be public information, we'd probably use it in the annual reports, track it annually to kind of start looking at certain trends and look for information that could be helpful. The industry may be interested in certain things that maybe legislators aren't, and vice versa. The nice thing about the advisory board is we have a very broad spectrum of different areas that we can take input for. And even though maybe the industry isn't interested in something legislators are, eventually, well, I kind of got used to seeing that. I like seeing that information. So what information we provide, my long babbling answer is, it's going to be available to everyone. Because it may not be useful for one group today, maybe it is down the road. So whatever we decide on and to provide, that information is just going to be available to the public across the board. And if Allison tells us we can't provide that because of this, then that information just isn't provided.
I do want to follow up. So, generally, all the information related to the medical marijuana program is inherently confidential. The one exception that kind of applies to this is that the department can release statistical data in such a manner that an individual or a specific compassion center is not able to be identified. And the concern with releasing all of this information, it's kind of like HIPAA. There's always a possibility that you can connect the dots and be like, okay, it's a woman of a specific race who's a veteran, who's a doctor, who is a physician or a surgeon, or, and you would be able to connect those dots and identify a specific individual. So while we may release some information, it's very important to protect the patient's privacy. And so any information that would be released would be de-identified, and it would be released in a statistical manner such that you wouldn't be able to identify anyone. And the same goes for compassion centers with sales information, that kind of thing. We may not want to release once the transdermal patches are started. We may not want to release how many transdermal patches were, because if there's one compassion center that's dispensing those or creating those, then you would obviously be able to tell immediately who that is. And that would be a violation of the Century Code regarding confidentiality of the program. So that's kind of the struggle, the push and the pull. We collect the information because it may be very useful, but the information that we're allowed to make public has to be kind of picked and chosen so that we respect people and businesses' privacy. So.
And this is especially true in rural communities.
Exactly.
And in a state like this, it's only 2 degrees of separation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, any other thoughts or suggestions for Jason on the reporting aspect?
Can you jump back to that slide? So if there's something that stands out in the demographic information that, yes, is something that you see as important, we would like, to know that, hear that. It gets to, we know the data is there. Since it's not a requirement in the annual report, we've only been tracking and pulling data or getting customized reports to take care of the requirements in statute. If we're looking to get and gather more statistical information, like I said, the first is what kind of things are people, what would they like to see? It's kind of how are we going to get that? What's it going to look like to take the alley to say, okay, yay or nay in providing something that looks like this?
I think from my perspective, from income level, just understanding if there's a population that is not able to access based on their income, if they're being left out, like that lower population.
On the
Like
same
maybe
lines,
maybe they qualify, but they can't afford to make the purchase.
and on the same lines, maybe the health care coverage is similar. Is there a gap in receiving medical services for a certain demographic? Based on that condition?
Okay, so what we will probably do is some more looking at the data that we know is in the IT system and then kind of have a discussion with Ally and come back to the committee at a future date. Okay.
Okay, sounds good. So let's discuss if there are any proposals for future meetings or dates.
Something we want to talk about, future. I know I've run into a lot of people that have had problems finding a doctor. Just again, me brainstorming, just thinking about things. I know the veterans, they have a doctor who's in the program here, or a nurse that's in the program.
Okay, just gonna put that down as an agenda item since we have to stick to the agenda.
You got it?
We'll just put it down agenda item to discuss on the next meeting. So we're not in any violation of open records.
Yep.
I even beat the lawyer to that.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, look. Nailed it. She's looking at you like you learned it.
Student becomes the master, and I really appreciate him for that.
So any other agenda items, if you think of something, they're okay if they send us, I'd like to see this on the agenda, if they email us.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so
Absolutely.
you are welcome to, submit an agenda item.
Sure.
For the next meeting. You can email Donna or myself and we'll make sure that it gets on the agenda item and you're not in violation of the open records meetings or requirements in regards to that. So we do have one if somebody has something else, and then it's kind of when would you potentially like to meet again discussion? If we're talking legislation potentially, some things for that, like the milligrams, you don't want to wait till November, would be my suggestion to board members. Because getting a little too close depending on what that change is going to be and how to move forward with the change.
As a kind of a determinative of the meeting, how long is it gonna take you to do a state survey on the information that they requested?
Not too long, if we could have a couple of weeks to make sure we get some information. One nice thing, the Department of Health, we are a founding member actually of CANRA, Cannabis Regulator Association. We're able to, post a question and we get pretty good feedback right away. But we're kind of using a website for those who have paid the dues, of course, and our voting members, where we can access certain information from other states regarding their laws and rules. So it's a lot easier. If you'd asked me that 2 years ago, I would have said you better give us a month because it was a nightmare to try to find. That's become a little more streamlined for us with other states. So I would suggest to the board that we would probably want to get through the administrative rule process, making that's going to be a little more time consuming in April. We'll have some things that we need to make sure that we meet at the beginning part of to middle of April. So April's maybe a little too quick on the turnaround time. Other than that, I know we're already getting into what they call summer. I was going to say construction season, but nobody likes that joke except me. So, and if you drove around Bismarck today, for those of you who came from out of town, you can tell we need construction season very quickly in this city.
We're looking at quarterly meetings though, still. Am I correct in saying that?
That's what the advisory board kind of looked at last time was quarterly meetings, but we didn't set up specific that, here's the quarterly meetings and we can use this to get agenda, stay to the agenda. So the board has some flexibility it's a pretty good sized board with different schedules and calendars to try to figure out and get going. And so I would tell you, if you waited till after September 1st, we're no longer the Department of Health. So we would come back to you as the Department of Health and Human Services as the merger takes place September 1. So your next quarterly meeting, if you want to stay quarterly and shoot for something 3 months from now, we could send out potentially a couple of dates to try to gauge some interest on the board again. And you're just creating more work for Donna because I'm looking at Donna and Dr. Weeby's kind of thinking June.
I'm good, June. I'm pretty open, so.
Let's look at the calendar. I wasn't actually texted, don't I? See you look at me.
Sure.
I got to look. I'm waiting till I leave. Yeah.
So we'll try to look at getting something set up around June. Okay.
Okay, great. So again, so if you have any agenda items, you can email Jason or Donna. So then they are put on the agenda for next meeting. Any other final comments? Hearing none, we stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Reed. And thank you, board members.
Thank you.